Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to an epic journey through one of the most compelling economic sagas of our time, the rise, fall, and ongoing evolution of Japan's economy. Once a global symbol of unstoppable growth, Japan transformed from the ashes of World War II into a titan of industry and innovation. Its story is one of ambition, ingenuity, and resilience, but also of challenges, miscalculations, and a fading economic star. Tonight, we'll dive deep into Japan's economic history, exploring the policies, people, and global forces that have shaped its path. From the post-war miracle to the struggles of today, we'll uncover what makes Japan's story so unique and what it means for the world. So buckle up. This is going to be a comprehensive ride. Before we dive into the post-war miracle, let's step back further. Japan's economic story didn't begin in 1945. To understand its modern trajectory, we need to look at its pre-war foundations. In the late 19th century, Japan underwent the Meiji Restoration, a transformative period that turned a feudal society into a modern industrial nation. The Meiji government invested heavily in infrastructure, railways, telegraphs, and ports. They sent scholars abroad to study Western technologies and brought experts to Japan to teach. By the early 20th century, Japan was a rising power, with a growing textile industry and a modern navy. But the early 20th century wasn't all smooth sailing. Japan faced economic volatility, including the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923, which devastated Tokyo and strained the economy. The global Great Depression of the 1930s hit Japan hard, leading to unemployment and social unrest. Yet these challenges forced Japan to innovate. The government promoted industrial conglomerates called zaibatsu, think Mitsubishi and Mitsui, which laid the groundwork for Japan's later industrial dominance. World War II, however, brought catastrophe. By 1945, Japan's economy was in ruins. Factories were bombed, cities were destroyed, and millions were displaced. The human toll was immense, and the economic outlook was bleak. But from this low point, Japan would stage one of the greatest comebacks in history. How? Let's explore. Now we hear about a huge foreign aid scheme that stored infrastructure rebuilt. This is a reference to the critical role of international support in Japan's recovery. After World War II, the United States, through programs like the Government Aid and Relief in Occupied Areas, GERIOA, and later the Economic Rehabilitation in Occupied Areas, EROA, poured funds into Japan. These weren't just handouts. They were strategic investments to rebuild a stable, anti-communist ally in Asia. Picture this. In 1946, Japan's GDP was a fraction of its pre-war level. Food shortages were rampant and inflation was skyrocketing. But the aid, combined with Japan's own determination, changed everything. The US helped rebuild ports, roads, and factories, giving Japan the physical infrastructure to restart its economy. By 1950, industrial production was recovering, and Japan was ready to take off. The real magic, though, came from Japan's people and policies. The Ministry of International Trade and Industry, or MITI, became the architect of the economic miracle. MITI wasn't just a government agency, it was a visionary force. It identified key industries, steel, shipbuilding, automobiles, electronics, and gave them subsidies, tax breaks, and protection from foreign competition. This wasn't free market capitalism. It was a carefully orchestrated partnership between government and business. Let's take the automotive industry as an example. In the 1950s, companies like Toyota and Nissan were small players compared to American giants like Ford and GM. But MITI shielded them from imports, allowing them to grow. Toyota adopted innovative production methods, like the Toyota Production System, which emphasized efficiency and quality. By the 1970s, Japanese cars were flooding global markets, known for their reliability and fuel efficiency, especially during the oil crisis of that decade. Electronics followed a similar path. Companies like Sony and Panasonic started with radios and TVs, but soon led the world in consumer electronics. The Walkman, introduced in 1979, wasn't just a gadget, it was a cultural phenomenon. Japan wasn't just making products, it was shaping global lifestyles. By the 1980s, Japan's GDP was second only to the United States. Its per capita income rivaled Western nations, and its cities were models of modernity. The Shinkansen bullet train, launched in 1964, symbolized Japan's leap into the future. This was the economic miracle, a nation reborn in just a few decades. But every boom has its bust, and Japan's came in the late 1980s. This was the era of the bubble economy, a time of irrational exuberance. Stock prices soared to dizzying heights. Real estate in Tokyo was so expensive that a single square meter in the Ginza district could cost $100,000. Japanese companies flush with cash went on global shopping sprees, buying landmarks like Rockefeller Center and Pebble Beach. What fueled this frenzy? Several factors converged. Japan's economic success created a surplus of capital. Banks were eager to lend, and interest rates were low, encouraging speculative investments. The yen's appreciation after the 1985 Plaza Accord made Japanese assets even more attractive, and the government, perhaps lulled by decades of success, didn't act to cool the market. Let's break down the mechanics. Low interest rates meant cheap money. Businesses borrowed to invest in stocks and real estate, driving prices higher. This created a feedback loop. Rising asset prices made companies and individuals feel richer, so they borrowed more. The Nikkei stock index peaked at nearly 39,000 in December 1989. It seemed like the sky was the limit, but it wasn't. In 1990, the Bank of Japan raised interest rates to curb inflation. This pricked the bubble. Stock prices crashed, losing nearly half their value by 1992. Real estate followed, with property values in Tokyo dropping by 60% or more. Banks were left with billions in bad loans, as borrowers defaulted on properties now worth less than their mortgages. The fallout was brutal. Companies went bankrupt, workers were laid off, and consumer confidence plummeted. The 1990s became known as the lost decade, but for Japan it stretched into decades. Deflation set in, a persistent drop in prices that sounds good but is economically devastating. When prices fall, consumers wait for better deals, businesses earn less, and the economy grinds to a halt. Let's illustrate this with a hypothetical example. Imagine you're a Japanese consumer in 1995. You want to buy a new TV, but prices are dropping every month. Why buy now when it'll be cheaper later? So you wait. Multiply that by millions of consumers and you see the problem. Businesses cut prices to attract buyers, but profits shrink, leading to layoffs and reduced investment. This is the deflationary spiral Japan couldn't escape. Now, let's turn to one of Japan's biggest challenges today, its aging population. At around 6 minutes and 18 seconds into the video, we hear, "So unfortunately you cannot be paid for taking out a home owned in Japan." This points to a crisis in Japan's real estate market, tied directly to its demographics. Japan has one of the oldest populations in the world. Over 28% of its citizens are 65 or older, and the birth rate is among the lowest globally at about 1.3 children per woman. This creates a double whammy, a shrinking workforce and a growing elderly population. Fewer workers mean less economic output, while more retirees strain pension and healthcare systems. This demographic shift has transformed Japan's landscape, literally. In rural areas, entire towns are emptying out as young people flock to cities like Tokyo and Osaka. The result? Akiya, or abandoned homes. In some regions, there are thousands of these vacant properties left behind by families who moved or passed away. Local governments have tried creative solutions, offering free homes or subsidies to attract residents. But the video's quote suggests these efforts aren't working. Why? Because rural areas lack jobs, schools, and amenities to draw younger generations. Let's paint a picture. Imagine a village in northern Japan, once bustling with families. Now, half the homes are empty, their gardens overgrown, their roofs collapsing. The local school closed years ago, and the nearest hospital is an hour away. A young couple might be tempted by a free house, but without jobs or infrastructure, it's not a practical choice. This is the reality for hundreds of communities across Japan. Even in urban areas, the property market faces challenges. Tokyo remains a global hub, but property values aren't growing as they once did. The government has kept interest rates near zero or even negative to stimulate demand. But as the video implies, these policies haven't revived the market. Home ownership, once a cornerstone of economic stability, is losing its appeal for younger Japanese, many of whom prefer renting or staying with family due to economic uncertainty. This demographic crisis isn't just about real estate, it's reshaping Japan's economy. A smaller workforce means less tax revenue, which strains public finances. Japan's public debt is over 250% of GDP, one of the highest in the world. Paying for pensions and healthcare for an aging population is a growing burden, and there's no easy fix. Let's shift to economic policy, specifically a bold experiment called Abenomics. At 7 minutes and 35 seconds into the video, we learned that in 2013, the Central Bank of Japan plans to literally double the amount of yen. This was a cornerstone of Abenomics, launched by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to pull Japan out of its economic slump. Abenomics had 3 arrows: monetary easing, fiscal stimulus, and structural reforms. Let's unpack each one. First, monetary easing. The Bank of Japan, under Governor Haruhiko Kuroda, embarked on an unprecedented program of quantitative easing. They bought massive amounts of government bonds, corporate debt, and even stocks, flooding the economy with yen. The goal? Weaken the yen to boost exports and create inflation to break the deflationary spiral. Did it work? To some extent, yes. The yen weakened, making Japanese goods cheaper abroad. Companies like Toyota and Sony saw profits rise, and the Nikkei stock index climbed. Inflation briefly hit 1%, a far cry from the 2% target, but better than persistent deflation. But there were limits. Consumers didn't spend as much as hoped, and businesses remained cautious about investing. The second arrow was fiscal stimulus, government spending to jumpstart the economy. Japan invested in infrastructure from bridges to high-speed rail, but with debt already sky-high, this was a risky move. Every yen spent added to the debt pile, raising questions about long-term sustainability. The third arrow, structural reforms, was the toughest. Abe aimed to modernize Japan's economy by increasing women's workforce participation, reforming labor laws, and opening up to foreign investment. But these changes faced resistance. Japan's corporate culture, with its emphasis on seniority and loyalty, is slow to change. Immigration, a potential solution to the labor shortage, remains politically sensitive due to cultural preferences for homogeneity. Let's look at a case study. Women in the workforce. Japan has historically had low female participation in professional roles, partly due to cultural expectations around family responsibilities. Abe's reforms encouraged companies to hire more women and offer flexible work arrangements. Progress was made. By 2020, women's workforce participation was around 50%, up from 40% a decade earlier, but many women are still in part-time or low-paying roles, and the glass ceiling persists. This shows the challenge of structural reform. Policy alone can't change deep-rooted cultural norms overnight. Abenomics was a bold gamble, but it wasn't a cure-all. Inflation never reached 2%, and growth remained sluggish. The massive money printing raised concerns about Japan's debt. If global investors lose confidence in Japan's ability to repay, it could trigger a crisis. For now, Japan's domestic bondholders and low interest rates have kept things stable, but it's a delicate balance. At 10 minutes and 51 seconds, the video mentions that is more and more likely for an economy based on belief workshop over the world. The phrasing is ambiguous, but it likely refers to Japan's reliance on global markets. Japan's economy is built on exports, cars, electronics, machinery. Brands like Nintendo, Canon, and Hitachi are global icons. But the world has changed and Japan faces fierce competition. Let's compare Japan to South Korea. In the 1980s, Japan dominated consumer electronics. But by the 2000s, South Korean companies like Samsung and LG were gaining ground. Why? Lower labor costs, aggressive innovation, and government support gave South Korea an edge. China too has become a manufacturing powerhouse, producing goods at scale and lower prices. Japan's high-quality products are still in demand, but its market share has shrunk. Energy is another challenge. Japan imports nearly all its oil and natural gas, making it vulnerable to global price shocks. The 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster forced Japan to rethink its energy strategy. Nuclear power, once a major source, was scaled back, increasing reliance on expensive fossil fuels. Japan is investing in renewables, solar, wind, hydrogen, but it's a slow transition. Trade tensions add complexity. The US-China trade war, for example, disrupted global supply chains, affecting Japanese manufacturers. Protectionism in some countries has made it harder for Japan to export. Yet Japan has fought back with trade agreements, like the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, which opens markets in Asia and beyond. Despite these challenges, Japan remains a leader in innovation. Its robotics industry is world-class. Think of robotic arms in factories or humanoid robots in healthcare. Japan is also investing in artificial intelligence and green technology. For example, Toyota is pioneering hydrogen fuel cell vehicles like the Mirai, which could redefine transportation. The question is whether these innovations can offset the structural challenges. Let's zoom out from numbers and policies to focus on people. Japan's economic challenges affect real lives. Imagine a young software engineer in Tokyo, working 12-hour days but unable to afford a home in the city. Rent is high, wages are stagnant, and job security isn't what it used to be. Or picture a retiree in a rural village living in a home passed down through generations but with no one to inherit it. These are the human stories behind the statistics. The IKEA phenomenon is a stark example. These abandoned homes aren't just empty buildings, they're symbols of a changing Japan. In a village in Hokkaido, you might find a street where half the houses are vacant, their windows boarded up, their gardens wild, the local grocery store closed years ago, and the nearest doctor is a long bus ride away. For the elderly residents who remain, it's a lonely existence. Younger generations face their own struggles. Japan's work culture, with its long hours and hierarchical structure, is legendary. The term karoshi, death from overwork, emerged in Japan for a reason. But younger workers are pushing back. They want flexibility, creativity, and work-life balance. Companies are starting to adapt, offering remote work or shorter hours, but change is slow in a society that values tradition. Let's consider a hypothetical family, the Yamadas. Mr. Yamada, 55, works for a mid-sized electronics firm. His salary hasn't grown in years and he worries about his pension. Mrs. Yamada, 50, works part-time at a local supermarket, a common choice for women re-entering the workforce. Their daughter, Aiko, 25, is a graphic designer in Osaka. She loves her job but feels trapped renting a tiny apartment with home ownership out of reach. Their son, Kenji, 22, is studying engineering but wonders if he'll find a stable job in a competitive market. This family reflects the challenges of Japan's economy: stagnation, uncertainty, and a search for new opportunities. Japan's story isn't unique. Other countries face similar challenges. Let's compare Japan to Germany, another aging, export-driven economy. Like Japan, Germany has a strong manufacturing base, with companies like BMW and Siemens. But Germany has embraced immigration to bolster its workforce, something Japan has resisted. Germany's birth rate is low, but not as low as Japan's, and its economy has avoided Japan's level of stagnation. South Korea offers another comparison. Like Japan, it experienced rapid post-war growth driven by conglomerates like Samsung. But South Korea's government has been more aggressive in promoting innovation and globalization. For example, K-pop and Korean dramas have become global cultural exports, something Japan achieved with anime but hasn't fully capitalized on recently. What can the world learn from Japan? First, rapid growth is possible with the right policies. Japan's post-war success shows how government, industry, and society can align. But it also shows the risks of overconfidence. The bubble economy was a lesson in the dangers of unchecked speculation. Second, demographics are destiny. Japan's aging crisis is a warning for countries like China, where the one-child policy has created a similar demographic time bomb. Third, monetary policy has limits. Abenomics showed that printing money can help, but without structural changes, it's not enough. What does the future hold for Japan? Let's explore some possibilities. One path is automation. Japan is a global leader in robotics. Think of SoftBank's Pepper robot, or Fanuc's industrial arms. If Japan can automate its factories, hospitals, and even elder care, it could offset its shrinking workforce. For example, robots could assist nurses in caring for the elderly, reducing the burden on healthcare systems. Another path is green technology. Japan's investment in hydrogen fuel cells could position it as a leader in clean energy. The Tokyo Olympics in 2020 showcased hydrogen-powered vehicles and infrastructure, a glimpse of what's possible. Solar and wind are also growing, though Japan's geography limits large-scale projects. Immigration could be a game-changer, but it's controversial. Japan has historically been cautious about opening its borders, valuing cultural homogeneity, but with a shrinking population, some argue for more foreign workers. Programs to attract skilled professionals like engineers and nurses have had modest success, but scaling up would require a cultural shift. Let's imagine a best-case scenario. By 2035, Japan has embraced automation, with robots handling 30% of manufacturing and healthcare tasks. Renewable energy accounts for 50% of its power, reducing reliance on imports. Immigration reforms bring in 500,000 foreign workers annually, boosting the workforce. Economic growth stabilizes at 2% and inflation hits the 2% target. This Japan is a leader in technology and sustainability, a model for aging societies worldwide. Now, a worst-case scenario. Debt spirals out of control, triggering a crisis of confidence. The yen weakens further, inflating import costs. Rural areas continue to depopulate, and urban overcrowding strains infrastructure. Growth remains below 1%, and Japan falls behind competitors like China and South Korea. This is the grim future the video hints at. The reality will likely fall between these extremes. Japan's resilience, its ability to reinvent itself, will be key. The same determination that rebuilt the country after 1945 could drive a new economic renaissance. Japan's economy isn't just about numbers, it's about culture. The concept of war or harmony shapes Japanese society. It's why companies prioritize group success over individual ambition, and why change can be slow. But this same sense of unity helped Japan recover after World War II and could be a strength again. Consider Japan's cultural exports. Anime, manga, and video games are global phenomena. Studio Ghibli's films like Spirited Away have won Oscars. Nintendo's Mario and Pokemon are cultural icons. These industries generate billions and show Japan's soft power. Could they be a bigger part of the economic solution? Perhaps. Investing in creative industries could attract younger workers and boost tourism. Tourism itself is a bright spot. Before the pandemic, Japan welcomed nearly 32 million visitors annually, drawn to its temples, cuisine, and pop culture. Cities like Kyoto and Tokyo thrive on tourism, but rural areas could benefit too. Imagine revitalizing Akiya villages as tourist destinations, offering authentic cultural experiences. It's a long shot, but not impossible. As we conclude, let's reflect on Japan's remarkable journey. From the Meiji Restoration to the post-war miracle, Japan has shown the world what's possible. Its bubble economy and lost decades were painful lessons, but they don't define the story. Today, Japan faces daunting challenges: aging, debt, competition, but also opportunities. Robotics, green tech, and cultural exports could light the way forward. What can we take away? Japan's story is a mirror for the world. It shows the power of collective effort, the risks of complacency, and the need for adaptability. As individuals, we can learn from Japan's resilience. As nations, we can study its policies, both successes and failures, to prepare for our own futures. So let's keep watching Japan. Let's learn from its past, engage with its present, and imagine its future. Will Japan rise again? That's the question we'll leave you with. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into Japan's economic saga. Let's continue the conversation, because Japan's story is far from over.